I was never the type to talk about faith. I grew up going to church because my mom insisted, but when I joined the army, all of that faded into the background. My world became about following orders, surviving, and getting back home in one piece. During my third mission overseas, I no longer felt anything seeing the chaos around me. Explosions, gunfire, people screaming. It was just part of the daily routine. You get used to it, or at least you think you do. Until one ordinary night, during a heavy attack, a bullet passed so close to my face that I felt the air moving against my skin. That's when everything stopped. Literally. The noise vanished, time froze, and right in front of me, where only smoke and blood had been seconds before, I saw something I could never have imagined. It was an angel, but not the way I'd seen them in paintings or movies. There was something in him that was both terrifying and comforting. His presence made my body tremble, but my spirit felt a peace I'd never experienced before. He didn't speak with his mouth, but I understood every word as if it had been engraved inside me. You belong to a chosen people. There's a mission for you. Go back and awaken them. That was it. Simple and direct. Then, in the blink of an eye, time resumed. The sound of explosions filled my ears again. My heart raced, and I threw myself to the ground, trying to understand what had just happened. But one thing was certain. I was no longer the same. After that night, something changed inside me. I was still at war, still holding a gun, still seeing the horror around me. But my vision was different. I could no longer ignore what I had seen. The angel hadn't given me any details, hadn't explained exactly what I was supposed to do, but those words echoed in my mind every second. Go back and awaken them. During the following months, I began to ask myself who they were. My family, my friends, my entire country. I wasn't sure, but one thing I understood. God had given me a second chance that night, and I couldn't waste it. In moments of combat, when fear tried to take over, I clung to a verse I had never paid attention to before. You did not choose me, but I chose you. John 15:16. It was as if, in some way, God was telling me I had a greater purpose than just surviving. When I finally came home, my family noticed that I was different. It wasn't just the way I spoke or acted. It was something deeper. I no longer had that coldness I'd carried before. But at the same time, I felt unsettled. How was I supposed to awaken the people? What exactly did that mean? I tried to get back to my routine, distract myself with everyday things, but it was useless. I could see the emptiness in people's eyes. I could see how they walked around with no hope, as if they were just existing but not really living. And then I understood. The war wasn't just on the battlefield. The real fight was spiritual. People were spiritually asleep, stuck in empty routines, not realizing that God was calling them to something greater. And if I truly believed in what I had seen that night in the middle of the war, I needed to act. At first, I didn't know where to start. I wasn't a pastor, I didn't have theological training, and I had never been the most religious guy. But one thing I knew, God doesn't choose the qualified, He qualifies the chosen. So I did what I knew how to do. I started talking with neighbors, friends, former Army colleagues, and I realized that many of them were just like I was before that experience. Empty, tired, living on autopilot. People who had already seen everything in life, who had already faced death and destruction, but had never stopped to think about what comes after. I remembered the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 5:14. Awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. I knew God wanted me to bring this message to them. So I began to gather people. At first, it was just a small group in my garage, but it kept growing. I shared my testimony, talked about what I had lived through, about how God saved me that night, not just physically, but spiritually, and I could see it in their eyes. Something was changing. Some cried, others were silent, but everyone felt something. God's presence was real in that place. It wasn't a prepared sermon. It wasn't pretty words. It was truth. I was there, a soldier who had already seen hell on earth, telling them that there was something greater, something beyond pain, beyond fear. And people began to awaken. As time passed, what started as a small group turned into something much larger. People brought their friends, neighbors, co-workers. Every week there was someone new, someone who said they were just there to listen, but left feeling different. And it wasn't because of me. It wasn't because I could speak well or had some special gift. It was God. He was doing something, and I just had to obey. One day, one of the guys I served with showed up. He was skeptical, always had been. Sat in the back, arms crossed, with that look of someone who was there just to please me. But in the middle of my testimony, he lowered his head, stayed silent, and when I was done, he came up to me. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I've seen so much out there. I thought God could never accept me after everything I've done." That's when I realized how real the spiritual battle is. The enemy does everything to convince us we're unworthy, that we've gone too far to come back. But that's a lie. The Bible is clear in Romans 8:1. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. After that day, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. My calling wasn't to be a great preacher in a pulpit or to build a huge ministry. My calling was to be among the people, especially those carrying invisible scars. Many veterans coming home from war felt forgotten, broken, directionless. But I saw God restoring their lives one by one. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew what God had done for me. And if He could transform me, He could transform anyone. My heart burned when I read Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me." I didn't know where all of this would lead, but I was ready to keep saying yes to God, one day at a time. Today, when I look back on my journey, I see that the transformation wasn't just external, but internal. God didn't ask me to be perfect. He asked me to be available. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. It doesn't matter how many mistakes I made. What matters is what I'm doing now. And every day is a new opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a great speaker, but I know what God did for me, and I know He can do the same for anyone. So many times, what keeps us from seeing God work in our lives is our own pride, our belief that we need to have it all together. But in 2 Corinthians 12:9, God reminds me, "But He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" I didn't need to be strong for God to act. I just needed to be honest and willing. The experience of being a soldier taught me to fight for my life. But the experience of being God's child taught me to fight for the lives of others. And that's more than any battle I've ever faced. The scars from the war are still on me, but today they have a different meaning. They're reminders that even in the darkest moments, God was with me, protecting me, guiding me. Every battle I overcame brought me closer to my true purpose. And if you're here today, hearing my testimony, know that God has a purpose for you too. No matter where you are right now or what you've been through, He can transform your life, just as He transformed mine. And the only thing He asks of you is that, like me, you say yes to His call. Now, as I share this with you, I see that I'm no longer the man who entered that war. I'm no longer that soldier who was lost in the midst of violence and pain. I am someone renewed, someone with a mission. And that mission isn't mine, it's God's. He gave me a new purpose, and that's something no one can take from me. Every day I look at those who were like I was, trying to find meaning in life, and I see how God touches them in unique ways. There's no pain He can't heal, no darkness He can't light up. And as it says in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." When we look to God in faith, He always has a future of peace and hope prepared for us, no matter how dark the road may seem. I'm here today standing before you, because God did something wonderful in my life, and He can do the same for you. If you're feeling lost, carrying the pains of your past, or struggling with life's scars, know that you're not alone. God is calling you to transformation. He wants to use your story, your struggles, and your victories to show His power. What you've lived so far doesn't define who you are, but what God can do in your life can define your entire future. So, my brother, my sister, if you haven't yet surrendered your life to Him, don't waste another moment. He's calling you, just like He called me. And if you allow Him, He will transform your life in ways you never thought possible.